When it comes to photos, I love the way movement looks. Whether it's a family session or a wedding, it doesn't matter. So a lot of times what I'm doing is focusing on what can I say to get these people to open up, to let their guard down, and to really have fun in front of my camera. And here are my 20 favorite prompts to make that happen. The first one is telephone. So just like when we were little and our teachers were like, hey, sit in a circle, stand in a line, and you pass down something, a secret, whispering it in each other's ear, you're gonna do the same thing. I do this for family sessions and even bridal parties at weddings. I have one person standing on one end come up with something silly to say. They pass it down the line, and by the time it gets to the other end, I tell that other person to yell it out as loud as they can, and everybody always erupts in laughter. My second favorite prompt is 20 questions. So I'm pretty good at coming up with these on the fly, but depending on whether it is a couple or a family, it depends on what types of questions I will ask. Sometimes I'll be like, everybody look at the person who wakes up earliest in the morning, or everybody look at the person who eats the most pizza on pizza night, or everybody look at the person who has the stinkiest farts, or everybody look at the person who, you know, whatever. And it always ends up in giggles and laughter. Sometimes I get the awkward looks, but it's always worth it. By the time the session is done, they're completely used to this and just being silly in front of the camera. My third favorite prompt is skipping, running, or walking. We've all seen the photos where people will walk off in the distance together or walking towards the camera, but I like to put a little twist on it. Sometimes I'll tell them to skip together, or I will literally have them do like a three-legged race. And so it just makes that laughter that much more real, and it looks less perfect and more fun. So the next one I call boomerang. This is where I have a couple, and that could be a mom and dad or a bride and groom, start back off kind of a distance from me. And one person will always be kind of leading the other, holding hands, looking at each other. And I tell them, I'm gonna have you run halfway towards me. And when you get halfway there, I want you to swing her around like a boomerang and pull her into your chest. And then I want you to just kiss all over her, you know, make her giggle, make her laugh, nuzzle her neck, do all of those things. And it always ends in laughter. And they don't usually have to do this more than one time because it doesn't have to look perfect. The next prompt is the Ryan Gosling, or for kids, it's just airplane. So for couples, I call it the Ryan Gosling, and the reason is because in Crazy Stupid Love, there's that scene between Emma Stone and Ryan Gosling, and he picks her up, and he's looking into her eyes, and you know, she's like holding his face, and it's like a super intimate, passionate scene. And I love having my couples recreate this. And if they're taking it too seriously, sometimes I'll tell them to spin in a circle, and then they always laugh, and so it's good to go. But for kids, sometimes I'll have dad crouch down, and I don't tell him what I'm doing. And then I go over here to the little kid and I say, I want you to run to dad as fast as you can, and I want you to try to knock him over. And typically when, you know, dad sees little kid running towards him, he'll pick them up, you know, play with him, be silly, tickling. The next one is called the rodeo. So on this one, I have somebody jump on the other person's back, and then I tell that person, you know, try to buck them off like a bull. This is a different take on that piggyback ride photo. You know, we don't want this to look like the early 2000s, but this is a really fun way to get them laughing, to get that hair moving, and everybody just being silly. The seventh one is called Trace Your Face. So I have a mom and a dad, or a bride and a groom, stand tummy to tummy, wrap their arms around each other. Sometimes I'll have the girl's arms be up, sometimes down, but I always will say, I want you guys to close your eyes and then put your nose to nose, and then you're going to trace their face with your nose. And it always ends up in laughter, even before it can actually happen. But it is such a good pose because it gets their face in different positions, and you know, it just makes it look really intimate and loving and laughing without there being any distance between them. The next one is called machine guns and slow-mo. So it's kind of like it sounds. Again, it's for a couple or a mom and dad, or even like a parent and a child. And what I do is I have them kind of wrap their arms around one person, and they do machine gun kisses, which are like all over the side of their face, and then I have them switch like halfway through to slow motion kisses. And so little kids just erupt in laughter because they think this is the silliest thing in the world. And then, you know, brides and grooms obviously are laughing because this is absolutely ridiculous, and, you know, but it makes for such good photos either way. The next pose was created actually by one of my clients. So he didn't tell me he was doing this, but it worked so well that I kind of adopted it as a prompt and have used it ever since. It's called the surprise. So whichever person is more silly, whether it's a family or a couple, I will get a hold of them beforehand. So just like as we're walking to a spot for the photo session, and I say, hey, I have a special job for you. So, you know, when we're in here and I give you a little head nod before the photo, I want you to scream boo as loud as you can right before we're about to take the picture. Every single time it ends up in people just cracking up. Like I said, it doesn't matter if it's a kid or a family or a bride and groom. Either way, nobody is expecting that. Everyone is looking at the camera either with serious faces or cheesy smiles, but that element of surprise just really takes the photo up to a whole nother level. The next prompt is the whisper. So on this one, I tell somebody to whisper in the ear of the other person what they love most about them. Now, this is easy to think of in relative to like a couple, but I actually love using this for family sessions too. Whenever I do like mommy-daughter photos or daddy-daughter photos or mother-son or whatever, different combinations, having them whisper into their kid's ear what they love most about them always makes their kids giggle and get the biggest, most proud smile on their face, and it really is adorable. The next pose is called the chest bump, and so I have two people holding hands looking at each other. I have them just slowly going back and forth until their chests bump against each other and then go back apart, and just do this over and over and over again. And, you know, just talking about, you know, everything they've gone through the last year, or sometimes I'll be like, tell the other person what you had for breakfast this morning, or, you know, it could be anything and everything, but that movement just looks so good in the pictures. The next one, and one of my favorites, is called the move. So I always use this for couples because for some reason, every single couple does this. I'm always like, okay, you know when she's in the kitchen and she's like doing dishes or cooking dinner, and you know the guy always walks up behind them, puts their arms around her, and is like, oh, you know, look, what are you cooking? You know, whatever, getting all sweet and intimate. And you know, girls typically, if you're a mom, you know, we're like, stop touching me, because we've been touched all day. But I always tell the couples to lean into it and to act like they're just so lovey-dovey, like the most obnoxious romantic couple that they've ever seen, like in a restaurant, and to really just embrace that. Sometimes I'll tell the girl to kind of wrap her arm up around his hair, kind of play with it a little bit, but just to really just have that sweet moment. The next posing prompt is sexy cereal. So I have them look into each other's eyes, and it starts out very serious, and then I'm like, okay, now in your sexiest voice as possible, I want you to list the names of as many breakfast cereals as you can. And it always ends in laughter. Sometimes they do actually get to the sexy cereal names, and sometimes they don't. But either way, I get what I'm looking for. Another posing prompt that I love is to look for something that you lost. So this works especially for groomsmen. I found that telling them to just like look off in different directions wasn't enough. They were being too silly. So I started to say, okay, I want you to pretend like you lost something and you're looking for that. And so that way they were all looking off in different directions without looking at each other or looking at me like, what are we supposed to be doing right now? And it works for family sessions too. The next one is called the hip bump. So I have the people link arms together and they're walking towards the camera, but they look at each other. But I tell them that I want their hips to bump together back and forth. Again, it's very similar to like the walking pose, but I like it a little better because it has that extra element of movement. The next thing that I love to do is the blanket game. And this works whether it's couples or families. So I bring a blanket to sessions, and you know when you're little, and you go to like, there's indoor recess one day and they have like a parachute and you ever like throw it up and everybody like runs underneath it and then gets to another spot? Well, we like to do the same thing but with a blanket. So for family sessions, this is always really adorable. And if the blanket isn't quite big enough, then what I'll do is I'll have the kids stand on one side, I'm on the other side. The parents will, you know, kind of like London bridges falling down. I tell them not to get caught up in the blanket. If it's a couple, sometimes I'll have them like toss the blanket up, run underneath it, wrap it around them, being all sweet. It always ends up in laughter because nobody ever gets it right the first time, but it looks so good in the pictures. So the next one isn't exactly a prompt, but it still works. So a lot of times I'll get these shy couples in front of my camera and they just feel weirded out by a lot of the prompts that I'm saying. And so what I'll do is I'll ease them in and I'll say, okay, I want you to, get really close together. I want you to put your foreheads together, or really like, nose to nose, whatever, but you can tell that they're just not loosening up. So I'll switch it up and I'll have her put her back into his chest. And I'll tell him, I want you to like go down, nuzzle her neck, kiss it, all of that good stuff. I want you to go back down to her shoulder, back up to her neck. And yes, they feel weird at first, but it is a slightly more natural prompt. So it typically has them break that guard down a little bit sooner than if I go into one of those other prompts first. The next prompt is think fast. So for this one, I always find out what it is that these people are interested in before their session. So, maybe they're really interested in beer or wine or cars or bands, or if it's a kid, I'll be like Paw Patrol or, whatever show that they're into. And I say, okay, I want you guys to look at each other and say the names of as many Paw Patrol characters as you can. Or I want you to say the names of as many bands as you can. And it literally can work with anything. The next one is the spin. So obviously for like a couple, you can twirl them like a ballerina, which also looks super cute for like a parent and child. But another different take on this is to have them pick them up and spin around in a circle like that. They can either do it like, by holding their hands and swinging them around in a circle, or they can just spin in a circle. Like I'll have them hold hands like this and spin like little kids on a playground. There's a lot of ways to implement that spinning motion in the photos without having to do the same pose every single time. The very last prompt is, what song is it? So I ask who's a better singer, him or her, or whoever's in the family. And whoever they say is the worst, I tell them that they have to hum a song while they're looking at the other people, and they have to try to guess what song they're humming. And typically they're such an awful singer that nobody is getting it and everyone erupts in laughter. So there it is. Those are my 20 favorite photography prompts. Let me know which photography prompt is your favorite in the comments below.